Hello, I'm Katie Wilson and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Polish president approves NATO troop deployment, strengthening the country's defence amid rising regional tensions. US and Chinese officials will hold a second day of trade talks in Spain on Monday. And Doha to host emergency Arab-Islamic summit today to discuss the Israeli attack on Qatar. First this evening, Polish President Karol Nawrocki has signed an agreement allowing NATO troops to be stationed in the country as part of the Eastern Sentry operation. The specific arrangements and details of the deployment decision are confidential and will not be disclosed. Eastern Sentry is designed to bolster the alliance's eastern flank with a particular focus on air defences. The announcement came just a day after Polish officials reported that 19 Russian drones had entered their airspace. Meanwhile, Russia's defence ministry stated that its drones had targeted military facilities in western Ukraine, adding that there were no intentions to strike locations in Poland. Continuing on this story, Polish and Allied jets were deployed in a precautionary operation to safeguard the country's airspace from potential drone threats. Airports were temporarily closed and air defences were placed on high alert. Authorities emphasised that the measures were purely preventative.
Polish and Allied aircraft have been scrambled in what officials describe as a preventive operation to secure the country's airspace. The move comes amid fears of drone strikes spilling over from neighbouring Ukraine. The alert was issued on Saturday, forcing the temporary closure of Lublin Airport in eastern Poland. It lasted around 2 hours before being lifted, during which authorities also warned residents in several border counties of a potential air threat. Ground-based air defence and reconnaissance systems were placed on high alert, though the military stressed the measures were precautionary, aimed at protecting Polish citizens and deterring any escalation. The alert comes after a major incident on Wednesday, when NATO jets shot down 19 Russian drones that had entered Polish airspace, leaving debris across the countryside, according to Prime Minister Tusk. European leaders have since called the incident a deliberate provocation by Moscow. Russia insists it did not target Poland, while its ally Belarus has claimed the drones veered off course after being jammed. By Saturday evening, Poland's operational command confirmed the mission was complete and air defences stood down, highlighting ongoing tensions along the country's eastern border.
Now, looking at the implications of this, thousands of Polish citizens are signing up for voluntary military training as fears of Russian aggression grow. It comes after Poland shot down Russian drones in its airspace last week, the first NATO member known to have fired during the war in Ukraine.
Just 6 kilometers from the Russian border in northern Poland, Office Administrator Agnieszka is digging a trench. She's not a soldier, but she wants to be ready to defend her family, including her 13-year-old son, if war ever comes.
I always say I would do anything to keep my child safe. I would absolutely stand and fight to protect him, and the rest, well...
Thousands of Poles like her are signing up for voluntary military training, part of a nationwide push to strengthen Poland's defences amid growing fears of Russian aggression. Those fears spiked this week after Poland shot down Russian drones in its airspace, the first time a NATO country has fired during Russia's war in Ukraine. The Kremlin dismissed Western concerns as emotional overload, insisting it poses no threat. But Poland isn't taking chances.
This is one of the main tasks for units in peacetime, to train the reserves. It's not something extra, additional, or often even unnecessary. It's one of the core responsibilities because every conflict shows one thing. Conflicts are always won by the reserves, especially long-lasting ones.
Training for new volunteers is underway at Braniewo, a military base near the border. More than 20,000 Poles have already signed up this year, and officials expect that figure to reach 40,000 by December, more than double the numbers seen in 2022.
I'm the oldest of 3 siblings, so I feel this need to protect my family. Just like our ancestors once defended these lands, I feel a responsibility to carry that on if such a need were to arise.
Since Russia's invasion, Poland has more than doubled its defence spending, now devoting 4.7% of its economy to the military, the highest ratio in NATO. For many here, it's about being ready and facing what they call a new reality on NATO's eastern flank.
Moving on to Zapad 2025, the ongoing joint military exercise between Russian and Belarusian forces. On Sunday, Russia's defence ministry released new footage from the drills, showing a missile launched vertically from a frigate before angling off into the horizon. According to the Russian defence ministry, the drills included the coastal missile system, with military helicopters providing fire support to assault groups. Baltic Fleet forces also practiced emergency rescue operations for ships. In a separate video from Belarus, soldiers were shown setting up command posts and securing communication centres at the Borisovsky training range. The Zapad 2025 Joint Strategic Military Exercise is set to continue until September the 16th. Now, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says a framework for a TikTok deal has been reached in trade talks with China in Madrid. Final details are expected after President Trump and President Xi speak on Friday.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said on Monday that a framework for a TikTok deal had been reached in Madrid, paving the way for the app's shift to U.S. ownership. He added that final details would be determined when President Donald Trump speaks with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday. Trump had hinted earlier in a Truth Social post that young Americans would be very happy with the outcome. The announcement came as US and Chinese delegations met in Madrid for a fourth round of negotiations in 4 months. Washington has warned it will proceed with a ban on TikTok unless its Chinese parent company ByteDance divests ownership and Beijing eases demands on tariffs and technology restrictions. Prior to the second day of talks, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said both sides had made good progress on technical details, but stressed that Washington would not trade away national security for a social media app. Beijing, meanwhile, denounced US pressure tactics as economic coercion and accused Washington of violating prior consensus between the two leaders. Talks are unfolding against a wider backdrop of tariffs, rare earth restrictions, and US curbs on Chinese chip makers. China has responded with its own investigations, including a new probe into US giant Nvidia. The Madrid discussions are set to wrap up this Wednesday.
Elon Musk's satellite internet service Starlink was back online for most users after a brief outage on Monday. The platform tracks outages by collating status reports from multiple sources. By this morning, nearly 40,000 users had reported issues. Starlink confirmed the disruption, saying its team is investigating. Outage reports came from multiple US states and countries like Ukraine, with some users regaining access after brief interruptions. Most of the reported problems included 60% related to internet issues, almost 40% citing a total blackout, and 1% complaining of poor service. Leaders from across the Arab and Muslim world are gathering in Doha today for an emergency summit. Their aim is to adopt a united and formal response to Israel's strikes against leaders of Hamas in the Qatari capital last week. Let's take a look at what we can expect from the meeting.
Leaders have arrived in Doha, into a city braced for a high-stakes gathering. Heads of states have assembled in the Qatari capital for an extraordinary summit of the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim Al Thani has opened the emergency summit, saying it was being held after what he called the major aggression that targeted Hamas leadership in Doha, adding that the attack went against the sovereignty of a state and was a violation of international law. The gathering was called after Israel carried out a strike on the Qatari capital last Tuesday, targeting Hamas officials engaged in ceasefire talks. The attack killed 5 Hamas members and a Qatari security officer, but missed the senior Hamas negotiation team. The strike has sparked outrage across the Middle East, with Qatar promising legal action. Among the proposal are calls for coordinated sanctions, suspension of ties, and even the creation of a joint security mechanism. Analysts say that this summit could mark the first time Arab and Islamic states take tangible collective action against Israel.
Well, staying in the Middle East, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio has met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem, reaffirming what both leaders call an unshakable alliance. The two held a 2-hour meeting before telling reporters they would act together to protect each other, even as regional anger mounts over Israel's strike on Doha last week. While Arab and Muslim leaders gathered in Qatar to denounce the assault, Rubio leaned firmly into Israel's stance, saying Hamas must cease to exist. The visit underscored Washington's continued support despite growing international condemnation. Welcome back to A News. Now, the United States and China have resumed trade talks in Madrid, aiming to ease tensions over tariffs, technology and TikTok. The meetings, led by senior officials from both sides, come at a delicate moment for the world's two largest economies. Now, to unpack the latest developments, we are joined by Andrew Leung, international and independent China strategist from Hong Kong. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Now, how significant are these talks in the broader context of U.S. China economic relations?
Well, the broader context, of course, is the rivalry between two great powers for economic and geopolitical influence around the world. Of course, China was first helped into the American-dominated world trading system, represented by the WTO. At a time when the United States hoped that by including China into the economic system, China would be more like the United States, economically and even ideologically or politically. But of course, this is a false hope because China, coming from a different civilization, different politics, different development circumstances, and China's have been walking its own path. But over time, China's growth is advancing quite remarkably, not only lifting the well-being of its people out of poverty, but increasingly advancing in technology, in a way eating Americans' lunch. Because when the United States first China into the WTO, China was only producing T-shirts and kind of low-end products. But nowadays, almost anything under the sun, from high technology, electric cars, high-speed rail, and very heavy tunnel drilling equipment, wind turbines, you name it. Yes, the products are now made in China. And also, China's influence is growing. So the United States sees China as a threat. That's the broad context. You mentioned technology there. Would you say that is the main sticking point to this, or could it be tariffs? Could it be TikTok? First of all, let's deal with technology. Of course, this is a sticking point for China because by imposing very stringent stranglehold over the high-end semiconductor chips, the Trump administration hopes to derail China's technological advance. However, China has found an even more powerful stranglehold on Americans' Achilles heel, which is China's monopoly and mastery of the processing of the world's rare earths, accounting for something like 99% of the world production for some key rare earth elements, which find embedded into a range of products, including Americans' top F-35 fighter jets. So that's why it gives China the confidence to negotiate with the United States. And as far as TikTok is concerned, of course, it's been extremely popular in the United States amongst the young people. The fear of the Trump administration is because it would breach American national security and including private data. And of course, the TikTok is not only popular in the United States, it's popular around the rest of the world. And it's very popular in China too, under a different name called Douyin. And then the American people, young people for the time fear that TikTok will shut down. They're all migrating in drones to the Chinese similar TikTok model, regarded by China as the TikTok refugees. But anyway, China is unlikely to give up the logarithm, which drives the parent company big dance businesses around the world, but it's likely to be able to satisfy American security concerns by ring-fencing the data within American security apparatus.
So let's stick with TikTok. So the US is pushing for TikTok's sale, and how much of that issue is about national security versus competition?
Well, it's a bit of both, because TikTok has been very popular, not only as a social media platform, but also there are stories which are not available in the other social media, which could have an element of political kind of sentiments involved. And so the political parties fear that this could really impact on how young people think, on American voters think, because of its large popularity. But as competition also, because TikTok also lends itself in promoting a lot of businesses, especially about the smaller businesses. They use TikTok to grow their trade platform and so on and so forth. And indeed, it's been popular around the rest of the world. And but I think that this is not allowed to be a barrier preventing the normalization of relationship between the countries. Hence, we're seeing some sort of a deal.
So you mentioned small businesses and how voters may be affected by these disputes. What about global markets and supply chains? How are they being shaped by these ongoing disputes?
Well, of course, the global market is not driven only by TikTok. It's also driven by other social media. But the power of the media is extremely important to grow business brands. For example, the latest Chinese toy called Labubu. I mean, it's become so popular. It's also because of the influence of social media. And then it's now Labubu has become a huge business around the world.
And what about global markets? What about a broader scale? How are they being affected by these disputes between the US and China?
Well, I think that if the United States owns their own TikTok platform, it's not going to be a major problem, because after all, the TikTok users in the United States would be able to use other platforms like LinkedIn and so on to interact with Chinese counterparts. Or a lot of them have migrated to the Chinese Red Note. But I think that at least it would satisfy the United States administration's concern about national security.
Now, looking in at this round of talks, could they realistically pave the way for a Trump-Xi summit, perhaps later this year?
Well, that's what President Trump hopes, because he wants to curate a kind of scenario, the optics that is winning in every way, whether it be Ukraine by putting pressure on Russia, whether it's the Middle East, sort of by brokering a kind of ceasefire, and also in Asia Pacific by mending fences with President Xi, and with the hope that he would sufficient momentum to get a Nobel Peace Prize. But at the end of the day, I think the whole world is seeing that what Trump has been doing is using coercion and unilateralism, bullying a lot of countries around the Global South. And so you can see that the Global South has been rallying with one another. Well, firstly, in the recent meeting in the Shanghai Cooperation, and also amongst the BRICS countries, not to form a bloc against the United States, because most of them still want to maintain good friendship and relations with the United States, but to recalibrate the relationship with the world's superpower, the most powerful superpower, and to preserve their own national sovereignty and development interests.
Now, looking to Beijing, China has launched investigations into the US semiconductor sector. How might this affect the talks?
Well, this is, of course, China's preparing its cards for negotiation, because as the United States is targeting a lot of Chinese companies, and China, of course, is doing likewise to preserve its negotiating position. But it is also a fact that large American companies like Google, like Nvidia, is like cornering the market. That's what happened in the European Union. That's why the European Union recently fined Google and also Elon Musk a lot of money. But this is a fact of modern large businesses, because the size and the global influence, and obviously they would be able to corner the market. But to what extent it's going to affect host countries' interests? Of course, it remains to be a big issue in the years to come, in a world which is increasingly connected, increasingly globalized, and increasingly borderless, with a digitized fourth and fifth industrial revolution.
And in looking ahead, do you expect these Madrid discussions to stabilise the uneasy truce or simply delay further escalation?
I think it would act as a possible bridge, maybe paving the way for a direct meeting between President Xi and President Trump, possibly even before the APEC summit, at least a telephone conversation. And I think a direct telephone conversation between these two leaders would serve to calm down this kind of toxic atmosphere between the two great powers, and would stabilize world markets in a way.
And you mentioned Trump would be hopeful of a meeting with Xi. How do you think that would go down in Beijing? What do you think Xi's thoughts are about that?
No, Beijing knows quite well that President Trump has been extremely eager to meet him. But as I said, unlike almost the rest of the world, no other countries has found or has in possession this all-powerful stranglehold over Americans' Achilles heel, the rare earths element, the ability, the monopoly and mastery of very intricate, highly complicated, highly polluting processes, and hundreds and thousands of processes depending on which elements. And through the past several decades, China has completed the mastery of these rare earths, even before the rare earths were suddenly discovered to be such a powerful weapon. But as in response to Americans' unilateralism, China has found this weapon, as it were, in self-defense, and it's a very powerful negotiating tool.
Should we be focusing on this more then, rather than focusing on TikTok, tariffs? Is that the sticking point, these rare earth materials?
Well, I think that most TikTok users would like it to continue, provided they can use the platform. They're not too worried about whether it's going to be just part of Big Dance or part of American company. And of course, the worry is that whether the American TikTok users will be able to interact with other users. But that I think the scale has got to be sorted out. But apart from TikTok, there are other medias. For example, you've got Facebook, you've got LinkedIn, and then you're China, you've got Red Note, and various other countries have got their own social media platforms. We are living in a world in which everything is instant, everything is transparent, everything is interconnected. And this is stands in stark mockery of Trump's unilateralism, trying to segregate the world into various parts, trying to ring fence the American businesses and so on. But security concerns are legitimate, but I think that if you overplay it, it's going to disrupt the whole supply and value chain and the interconnection between the world's peoples.
Always great to have you on the programme, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Turkey's foreign ministry has marked the 107th anniversary of Baku's liberation, extending their congratulations to the Azerbaijani people. In a statement, Ankara said the struggle for independence remains a shared pride and paid tribute to those who gave their lives for freedom. The ministry added that their sacrifice will always be remembered with mercy, gratitude and respect, underlining the historic bond between Turkey and Azerbaijan. Now, staying with the 107th anniversary of the liberation of Baku, a symbol of unity, sacrifice and the enduring spirit of the Azerbaijani people, let's dive into this chapter of history and see how it helped shape the capital city of Azerbaijan as we know it today.
Baku, known as the City of Winds, has long been at the center of political storms along the Caspian shores. If we look back 107 years, the city was gripped by chaos and uncertainty as multiple powers fought for control over its strategic and symbolic importance. Azerbaijan declared its independence from Tsarist Russia during the political chaos of World War I. While the new republic was announced in Tbilisi on May 28, 1918, its most vital city, Baku, remained under Bolshevik control. Meanwhile, the newly established Azerbaijani Republic knew it could not survive without Baku. The city was the economic and strategic heart of the nation. But facing the 18,000-strong Baku Soviet troops, Azerbaijan's small national army of 600 soldiers stood little chance on its own. In search of support, Azerbaijani leaders turned to the Ottoman Empire. On June 4, 1918, both governments signed the Treaty of Mutual Assistance and Friendship. In response, Enver Pasha sent his brother, Nuru Pasha, along with the Caucasian Islamic Army to help Azerbaijan. On June 10th, Bolshevik and Armenian Dashnak forces launched an attack toward Ganja, which had become the temporary seat of the Azerbaijani government after Tbilisi. Between June 27th and July 1st, the crucial battles near Goyche turned the tide. The Caucasian Islamic Army stopped the advance and began moving toward Baku. Towns like Goyche, Kurdamir, Agsu, and Shamaki were liberated one after another. Back in Baku, Bolshevik policies were losing support. On July 31st, the Baku Soviet resigned. A new power, the Central Caspian Dictatorship, was declared on August 1st, supported by Mensheviks, socialist revolutionaries, and Dashnaks. Soon after, a new foreign player entered the scene, the British. On August 4th, British troops under General Lionel Dunsterville arrived in Baku. Their goal was clear, secure the city's oil and stop the advancing Islamic army. By this time, the Ottoman Azerbaijani forces had already launched several failed attempts to liberate Baku. Finally, on the night of September 14th, the joint forces launched a successful offensive. Dunsterville's troops evacuated Baku and left for Anzali. On September 15th, the final battles were short. The Central Caspian Dictatorship was defeated and Baku was liberated. The price of victory was high. The Ottoman army alone lost 1,130 soldiers in the operation. But the result was historic. On September 16th, a grand military parade was held in honor of the Turkish-Azerbaijani victory. Soon after, the capital of the Azerbaijan Democratic Republic was moved from Ganja to Baku, marking the true beginning of state building in Azerbaijan. Though Azerbaijan would lose its independence to the Soviet Union less than 2 years later, the Battle of Baku was a defining moment. It showed the strength and determination of a young nation. Even after decades under Soviet rule, the memory of this victory lived on. And after 70 years, Azerbaijan once again rose to reclaim its sovereignty.
Well, President of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev visited Khojaly district to inspect wide-ranging reconstruction efforts in new economic projects. Dashbulak and Bedara, two villages retaken last year, are now seeing both modern infrastructure and large-scale agricultural investment.
On the 15th of September, President Ilham Aliyev toured a 13-hectare mulberry orchard established in Dashbulak village in Khojaly district. The project, involving 130,000 saplings imported from China and supported by drip irrigation, is expected to yield 100 tons of mulberry leaves by 2026 and 5 times that amount by 2030. Cocoon production is set to begin in 2 years, with plans for silkworm breeding facilities, processing centres and cluster-based orchards. The initiative has already created permanent jobs for dozens of people, with 750 more to be engaged seasonally. President Aliyev also visited Said Bailey village, which returned under Azerbaijan's control in September 2023 during an anti-terrorist operation by the armed forces. The head of state reviewed ongoing infrastructure development in the village. Said Bailey has 140 houses. So far, 10 homes have been restored. By the end of this year, 44 houses will be ready for use, with a further 64 scheduled for completion in 2026. President Aliyev also met with residents of Bedara, Dashbulag, Said Bailey, and Shushakan villages, speaking directly with residents who have returned after decades of displacement.
Armenian Interior Minister Arpin Sargsyan met with Brendan Hanrahan, a senior U.S. State Department official, to discuss bilateral cooperation and the Trump route for international peace and prosperity. Sargsyan praised the U.S. role in the August 8th Armenian-Azerbaijani peace agreement and highlighted ongoing efforts in police reform, cybercrime prevention and security cooperation. Hanrahan emphasized the close partnership between Armenia and the United States and the importance of continued collaboration. Staying with Armenia, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan said that Armenia is experiencing its highest level of security in history. Addressing the international conference, Comprehensive Security and Resilience 2025, he emphasized that the country is more independent, sovereign and secure than ever before. According to Pashinyan, peace has been established between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the focus now is on making decisions that ensure long-term stability. He said institutionalizing peace is essential and will safeguard Armenia's statehood for centuries. Pashinyan also noted that recognizing Azerbaijan's territorial integrity was necessary to secure Armenia's own borders, and that the August 8th peace agreement in Washington further strengthened Armenia's security. Welcome back to A News. Now, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's latest speech at the Comprehensive Security and Resilience Conference has raised questions about Armenia's alliances, territorial integrity and the country's evolving security doctrine. To understand the implications, we are joined by political analyst Boris Navasardian from Yerevan in Armenia. Thank you for being with us. Now, what are the key takeaways from Prime Minister Pashinyan's speech, and why is it being described as significant?
Thank you for having me. The speeches of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan during this period are immediately connected to pre-election campaign, although it is quite early and until elections we have almost 10 months. But still it is very important to understand what kind of pre-election agenda will be delivered by Prime Minister and his political party to the electorate. And in fact, what we can hear from his speeches all these days is that Armenia is clearly moving forward to regional cooperation and establishing normal relations with all its neighbors. And that the previous, let's say, stakes put on having strong powerful allies that would help Armenia to implement its national interests is in the past. And there is understanding that even having powerful allies and not having normal relations with the neighbors does not provide for security of the country. Now the issue of security and the issue of cooperation in the South Caucasus are the main, I would say it's cornerstone of the whole pre-election agenda of the Prime Minister. And this is perceived by the majority of the population.
Now, the Prime Minister suggested that military political alliances fail to ensure Armenia's security. How do you interpret this statement?
This is first of all connected with the fact that for dozens of years, from independence of the Third Armenian Republic, the stakes were put on military alliance with Russia, and the help of Russia to realize all national interests of the country. However, the recent years proved that this element in the security and external politics did not work, and that it would be more wise from the side of Armenian state to create closer relations with the neighbors, which was not, unfortunately, the fact. And now we see that there is clear rethinking of the priorities of security and external politics.
Now, you touched upon Yerevan's relationship with Moscow. On the eve of Pashinyan's trip to Russia, how do you relate his comments on Moscow in the CSTO to Armenia's broader foreign policy?
In fact, as probably your audience knows, Armenia has frozen its membership in the CSTO, which means that there are no signs of cooperation. Armenia does not pay money to the account of CSTO, and Armenia is not participating in the gatherings of representatives of this military alliance. However, Armenia is still member of Eurasian Economic Union, where, of course, the most important partner is Russia. And Russia's influence on the economy of Armenia is still huge. So we are now thinking in the expert community and political elite of Armenia how it will be possible to diversify economic relations. And in that point of view, it is very much important that South Caucasus and Armenia as part of this region will become communication hub. And the agreements that were achieved in Washington in August 8 promise quite good developments in that direction.
Now, another thing Pashinyan placed emphasis on was Armenia defining its own territorial integrity more clearly. Why do you think this question has become central in his discourse?
We know perfectly that there were a lot of disputes between Armenia and Azerbaijan about territories. This dispute lasted for dozens of years, and only, I would say, in August this year, the common agreement was achieved that the borders of two Soviet republics, Azerbaijan and Armenia, will become state borders between the two independent countries. And this is, as mentioned, Prime Minister of Armenia, is the most important element of security system in which Armenia hopes to be in the nearest future. So now I think the most important is that initially the peace agreement between Baku and Yerevan will be just temporary postponing of signing of the agreement. And for this, I hope that both sides will continue their constructive dialogue, and all interested parties, be it United States, European Union, or other neighbors of our countries, could contribute in this dialogue by constructive participation and not imposing their own interests to the countries of the region.
Now, sticking with that, Armenia has recently removed the image of Mount Ararat from the visas it issues to foreign visitors. Is this part of the necessity for Turkish-Armenian normalisation? And is it also a sign that Yerevan is prepared to take further steps to show that it's doing its utmost to uphold those principles at the heart of the joint declaration and that initialed peace agreement in Washington?
As you know, Armenia was visited by a representative of Turkey, Mr. Kalic, for the discussion of several issues that remain between Armenia and Turkey. And I do not exclude that removal of the Mountain Karabakh graphic from the border stamp was a kind of step towards more constructive dialogue. At the same time, I don't think that the war against symbols is something that will contribute to, let's say, constructive dialogue. So I would suggest our political leaders of all countries of the region to forget about simple symbols and concentrate on pragmatic issues.
Now, going back to what you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, that Armenians will be going to the polls in less than a year's time, what domestic political reactions do you expect in Armenia following this speech?
I don't think that something very much new was suggested to the public in this speech. Although Nikol Pashinyan is known in the country, and not only in the country, but also internationally, as a person who makes controversial statements. In line with things that are obvious and that are clearly supported by majority of population, they were a statement that still will raise probably criticism and doubts. One of them is that army is the last factor for the security of the country. But if we are talking about territorial integrity, then I think that everyone understands that armed forces are one of the factors that keep any aggressive neighbor that could appear one day thinking about the possible consequences and not making mistakes. So I guess that the more harmonized politics that would be comprised of constructive dialogue with the neighbors and establishing normal relations will be combined with having a strong security system, which undoubtedly include army. So I guess all these kind of debates will continue before the elections, and let us hope that there will be harmonized political agenda which will take into account all the aspects of security and development of the country.
And looking ahead, do you see the shift in doctrine strengthening Armenia's position internationally, or is there a risk that it would further isolate the country?
For sure, this will create better relations of Armenia with international community, because through years we saw that the main international players, maybe except for Russia, were interested that there is stability and peace in this region, which would allow to ensure developments of the region and its contribution to the international trade and international cooperation. So now we see that clearly Russia stays alone in this sense, and the countries of Central Asia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Armenia, hopefully Georgia will join this process very soon, are interested in establishing good cooperation and development of communication hub in our region, which is probably the strongest component for the prosperity of all our countries. So I see certain signs that even Moscow is understanding that this is unavoidable, and looking not to possibility to impose only its interest to our region, but to try to use this situation also to see there its own interests in terms of economic development, first of all. Let's hope that the tension existing between Azerbaijan and Russia also will be overcome soon, and Russia, as all other players, will become more constructive actor in all processes that are happening around.
All really interesting insights there, especially ahead of that election. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme.
Thank you too.
Well, you're up to date with world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.